Dr. Kaviraj Subon, Chairperson, Mauritius Research and Innovation Council, Professor Tishan Bhawan, Executive Director, Mauritius Research and Innovation Council, Mr. Biku, Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Information, Technology, Communication and Innovation, Mr. Mark Serikore, Director, Department for Africa and Least Developed Countries at the World Intellectual Property Organization, Dr. Sasha Wunsch-Vincent, Co-Editor, Global Innovation Index and Section, Economics and Stats Division, World Intellectual Property Organization. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First and foremost, I wish to present the apologies of Honorable Mr. Deepak Palgobin, who cannot attend the function due to some unforeseen and urgent circumstances happening in the country right now. So on behalf of the MRIC, I'm pleased to welcome you to this workshop on sustaining the innovation momentum of Mauritius in the post-COVID era. Special welcome to our colleagues from WIPO, Geneva, who are participating in the workshop via Zoom. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, the ranking of Mauritius has improved from 82 rank to rank 52 in 2020 in the GII report. This is indeed a very good sign for the country as we are striving to become an innovation-driven economy. But along with this unexpected and drastic improvement in performance comes along the challenge to sustain and improve our performance, and that too in a context where we are facing an economic crisis with the COVID-19 outbreak. It is in this context that the MRIC, with the support of WIPO, has organized this interactive workshop to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the national innovation ecosystem based on the GII report. Ladies and gentlemen, I remind you that the MRIC is mandated to promote innovation in Mauritius, and WIPO has a major role in protecting IP worldwide, besides being one of the editors of the GII report, along with Cornell University. Later, we will have the opportunity to listen to Dr. Sasha Wunsch-Vincent, who is the co-editor of the GII report and based at WIPO head office in Geneva. The highlight of today's workshop will be a panel discussion involving actors from academia, public sector, industry, on important issues such as the role of innovation linkages, R&D, IP, and education in promoting innovation. The panel discussion will be facilitated by Mr. Chipeng Tan from Team Synthesis. But before that, we will have the opportunity to listen to two presentations from WIPO and MRIC respectively on the performance of Mauritius in the GII report 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the opening ceremony of the workshop. The Executive Director and Chairman of the MRIC and the Director of the Department for Africa and Least Developed Countries at the World Intellectual Property Organization will give their addresses. Before Mr. Biku, Deputy Secretary at our Ministry, delivers the speech of the Minister and opens the workshop. I will now request you, ladies and gentlemen, to keep your mobile phones on silent mode during the workshop. In compliance with our data protection policy, you are also informed that the event is being recorded and being broadcasted live on social media. On this note, I will now request Dr. Bhawan to give his welcome remarks.
Today, we will be discussing about sustaining the innovation momentum of Mauritius in the post-COVID-19 era, with indeed particular emphasis on the Global Innovation Index. We have gained 30 places in the GII ranking. We are happy about it, but we need to be humble as well, as the challenge is indeed to maintain and improve that particular position. Today's workshop is of importance as it regroups stakeholders from academia, private and public sectors, with the clear objective to discuss key issues that would pertinently impact our innovation ranking. The impetus of having this workshop derives from the proceedings of a technical committee established by the MRIC, and one of the aims of this committee was to advise, and is still to advise, on the way forward for the setting up of comprehensive databases that can be objectively be processed by WIPO and Cornell University team. At the outset, it is important to know how data are being picked and indeed to be used qualitatively and quantitatively for ranking assessment. Data are picked from websites, government sectors, public sector institutions, from focal points. MRIC is one, Ministry of Education is another, EDB is another focal point. Data are picked from websites of private sector, companies, industries, institutions. Data are picked from international institution reports on Mauritius, for instance the World Bank, and indeed also data are picked from social media. So this is why it is important that the right and accurate data be made available. Ladies and gentlemen, innovation is important at all stages of development. Specifically, the creation and division of technologies that can play a critical role in addressing socio-economic objectives and environmental challenges. It is within this context that the Mauritius Research and Innovation Council Bill has been called to replace the Mauritius Research Council Act of 1992. To create a more conducive environment for research and innovation works, to transform Mauritius into a modern, developed and technology-savvy nation. In this year, subjugated by the COVID-19 pandemic, the MRIC has launched a number of initiatives to systematically respond to the needs of the country and to contribute to innovation endeavors. I'll mention the COVID special call with 252 projects received, 26 projects co-financed by the MRIC and applicants to the tune of 28 million rupees. The Waikasho special call with a budget of 25 million rupees. We have received 56 projects and these are being currently processed. We are internationalizing our activities. We have a joint technology innovation program. The Mauritius Research Council and the Technology Innovation Agency of South Africa have just made a joint call, and I'm pleased to announce that we have received 26 projects which we are processing right now. In our initiatives, we would certainly do not forget Rodrigues. I understand our colleagues from Rodrigues are also listening in this workshop. We are launching a special call for Rodrigues with an initial budget of 5 million rupees. We have our satellite project, launching is scheduled in May 2021, and we envisage using space satellite technology to tackle SDG 4, quality education for grassroots innovation, and SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure issues. Ladies and gentlemen, if Mauritius wants to become highly competitive in the innovation era, It will first and foremost need to assign more value to the capabilities of innovation creation by promoting an influential innovation ecosystem. Our innovation system and its corresponding activities will need to be carefully facilitated by both government and the private sector. Mauritius needs continuously to revamp its priorities, objectives, and goals, and formulate policies and strategies, and to reach these goals by sustainable, effective governance framework. In this backdrop, this workshop is being organized to create a dialogue among relevant actors to identify changes and opportunities to leverage strengths while overcoming weaknesses. Indeed, with the objective of creating an innovation culture and to deliver a functional innovation system. I anticipate a very fruitful discussion among our panel members and would also request all participants in the room to interact optimally with our resource persons. With these words, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention.
For participating in this meeting, and thank you for this invitation. The second, not long ago, I've been in Mauritius, and I was there when people were discussing about the creation and the establishment of this institution, this commission. I was there with my colleague, and we did have some visit for some colleague, and we went even to the establishment of this. And the Fed is always particular to congratulate an African countries who made all this jump, I think 10 points from 82 to where we are now. It's very important. It's very important because when you look at the overall picture of the global innovation ranking, is Africa, most of the African countries, let's say sub-Saharan African country, are around starting at 90 or 100 out of 120. So having a country like Mauritius who is at this level is already a matter of pride for me, and also for you should be proud of what we did. So I'm very happy to do that. But let me, on behalf of the director of WIPO, Mr. Darren Tan, and my colleague Sasha, to thank you for this invitation. You are discussing about innovation, you are discussing about IP. I won't go further because I think my colleague Sasha will maybe deal with the substantive part. I just want to say that it's important to see you participate in discussing about the way forward, because this way I see the celebration and sometimes it's just the time to evaluate what you did and how to move forward, and it's what you are doing. You're not celebrating your ranking the job, but to see, okay, let's see our weakness or our strengths and see how we can move, because you even mentioned the sustainability. So it's very important for a country and this global innovation world, let's say innovation facilities. It's important because Mauritius is a leader and how to show example to the others, and we should learn from you. That's why I'm very particularly happy to be there too, as a director of the Cooperation of African Region and this developing country, to learn about how you work, how you organize yourself. You mentioned innovation ecosystem, how it works, which kind of connection you have, how you make things move. And it's important for me to learn and to see how we can not duplicate it, but we can actually customize it for the other countries. It's important also because in Africa, you know, you must be aware that you're moving from, you have created this, after this free trade zone, And I think that Mauritius should be and will be a very important partner and a very, very important country, and also based on the fact that is very keen or very working on this innovation. I'm sure that the competitiveness of the country will be also a key for to get the benefit of this new environment. Is important because innovation brings to competitiveness and value addition. And I think that the way Mauritius is now discussing evaluate his strengths and also his weakness is also to make him a very important partner and a very competitor in this new environment in Africa. So I'm very happy to share this moment with you because I want to learn. Really, I just want to learn, to hear from you and to learn about the model and how you do it. You have no choice, I think, also in Africa, because with this pandemic, one thing we should learn from the pandemic, we should rely on ourselves first. Because when the border closed, you can rely on yourself. So promoting innovation, find a solution to your need and to your concern is important. So that's why I'm very happy to see this, the title of your meeting, because it's very important to rely on yourself first, especially when you're kind of highlands. So you should rely on yourself, and it's what you're doing. And I urge you to start doing that and just to have also international cooperation, but first rely on yourself. And I'm very happy to see you thinking, to see how you can sustain the momentum, and congratulations. And thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you. Take care. Have a nice day.
I promise you that my 100 pages of speech has been reduced to only 1 page, so no worries about that. Just to go straight away to what we want to do today is to enlist your support. First, to celebrate, because Mauritius has got 30 places. That's time for celebration, isn't it? That's all for a celebration because you contributed to it, right? But we need to sustain that. It's like when you go back home and tell your dad, Dad, I'm first. I improved. That's it. Congratulations. But you've got to sustain it. And this is where the difficulty lies. So we're here gathered to thank you, first of all, for this improvement in ranking. Without your support, without your input, we would not have been able to achieve that. So you deserve our congratulations. Now, sustaining it is another challenge. But I'm happy to see so many people around who are willing to collaborate. Being a mathematician myself, for me an index is nothing but an equation at the end of the day. You have 80 indices there, Dr. Madu will explain all that. It means that we need to be able to simulate those 80 equations. Of course, we don't have the recipe exact, but if we try, we should be able to reach close to it. So, first, the data that we have, we need the data from you, you have the data. And I here thank the Honorable Minister, who is now, through the Cabinet, allowed to chair a meeting to collect data. So whatever data you are going to send to, as per your requirement, to institutions abroad, you can send a copy to, you will have to send a copy to the Ministry, which is already a good thing, so that we can collect the data. Integrity of the data. For us, we can't understand that Mauritius is first in doing this, ease of doing business in Africa, whereas here we are quite low in the ranking. Somewhere, I'm not saying that it's wrong. The recipe can be different, the formula can be different, yet there is a discrepancy that we need to look into, that we need to address. And I think you are the right people around to be able to help us address those discrepancies that we can't understand. How it is possible that on one side you are being ranked at the top, and on the other side the ranking is low. So there is an issue here in terms of integrity that we need to discuss with you, right? Again, in terms of data collection, we have staff dedicated, Dr. Mami is dedicated, Professor Barra. Collection of data. Rest assured that when you're sharing your data, it's not for us. The GII is not MRICs. The GII is for the country. The GII is for all of us. If you don't give us the data, we don't communicate it, we don't present it, the ranking is going to worsen, right? It's not only MRIs, it's the country. So that's why I want you to ensure that you convince your department, your ministry, your people to send us the data, the right data, the corrected data, so that we can have the right picture. So, and I know that today's workshop is only the first one, that Madhu will keep on inviting you around, right? So that we improve from the ranking now. Okay? So, thank you very much. I promise not to bring the 100 pages speech. So thank you very much. Looking forward to working with all of you. And thanks again for being here for this workshop. Thank you.
It is indeed a deep privilege to be here today to officially launch this workshop on sustaining the innovation momentum of Mauritius in the post-COVID-19 era. This workshop is a collaboration between the MRIC, operating under the aegis of the Ministry of Information Technology, Communication and Innovation, and the World Intellectual Property Organization. Mauritius is striving to become an innovation-driven economy. It is anticipated that through the MRIC Act, which was proclaimed on 1st September 2019, this endeavor has now a solid basis to materialize as the MRIC's role to promote research and innovation has been strengthened. One of the major functions of the Council, as per the MRIC Act, is to develop every 5 years a national strategy for research and development and innovation based on the scientific, technological, social, and economic needs and challenges of the country. This is an important function, as it is only with a well-defined strategy that a country can progress in its innovation path. One which needs to be evidence-based, established on real data and information on what is happening on the ground and the needs of the country. Availability of data, as pointed out by Dr. Supo, is hence essential to design strategies and policy making. This takes us, ladies and gentlemen, to the topic of the day, that is the Global Innovation Index and the GII report, which is published every year by the WIPO and Cornell University. The GII provides detailed metrics about the innovation performance of different countries, about 131 countries. It consists of 80 indicators to explore the broad vision of innovation, including political environment, education, research and development, creativity, business and market sophistication. The GII not only provides a path forward to compare the innovation performance of different countries, but also provides metrics to allow countries to analyze their own performance and identify gaps and weaknesses in their national innovation ecosystem. This was pointed out again by Dr. Supo. We have to capitalize on the strengths and address the weaknesses that has been identified. This is why, with a will to further improve the performance of Mauritius in the GII index, Cabinet has, at its meeting held on 11th September 2020, agreed that all ministries and departments falling under their aegis should first submit timely and relevant data to organizations concerned, local and international, as well as update their respective websites with regard to such information. And this was amply highlighted by Dr. Supo, okay, the need to submit relevant data in a timely manner. And also to take steps to improve on the different indicators falling within their respective purview, either fully or partially. Cabinet has also agreed that the ministry sets up a committee with representatives of all ministries and departments and relevant private sector bodies. The objective is to closely monitor the situation, both with respect to making updated data available and improvements on the different indicators. The main highlights of the GII report regarding Mauritius, okay, you might be already aware, okay, are as follows, some of them. Okay, so we have jumped from 52nd position, from 82nd position to the 52nd position. We are first in the sub-Saharan African countries, and this year, Mauritius ranks 47th in innovation inputs. And as for innovation outputs, Mauritius ranks 60th position. This position is higher than last year and higher compared to 2018. The GII report clearly mentions that the positive ranking of Mauritius is attributed to mainly three factors. First, the mix of new data availability, because there was some data which were not available, okay, before that. And thanks to MRIC, which has been consulting stakeholders, okay, to get data. So there's a mix of three factors which have caused this improvement: mix of new data availability, data revision at the source, and performance effects. Compared to other economies in sub-Saharan Africa, Mauritius performed above the average in 6 out of the 7 GII pillars. However, we are lagging behind, okay, in the 2 pillars, right, which we are going to see during the presentation and chart ways what to do about that. The 2 major pillars on which Mauritius has to improve are business sophistication and knowledge and technology outputs. Ladies and gentlemen, the MRIC has done a great deal of work to ensure data revisions and data availability, which have contributed positively to this new ranking. This is represented by the MRIC during the workshop. But of equal, if not higher importance, is to work towards improvement in the different indicators. We are aware that ICT-related indicators play an important role in the national innovation ecosystem. So, some of the measures taken by our ministry, which have contributed to the innovation performance of the country, are as follows. Some positive policy measures to boost the digital footprint by making operational the information highway for sharing information among public sector agencies. So, many of you present, especially those from ministries and departments, are aware that there is an information highway whereby ministries and departments can share information. We can talk to each other, and this has contributed positively. There are at least 492 data sharing e-services and 130 connections between ministries and departments that are presently operational. There are also 25 e-services that have been developed to facilitate citizens' interactions with public sector agencies. Measures have also been proposed to appoint chief information officers in the ministries to oversee e-government projects. Furthermore, the government is also encouraging the development of mobile applications by startups to provide information on government services such as transportation, traffic, and weather forecast, amongst others. On that score, I would like to point out something. MRIC is also working on the public sector transformation scheme. Okay? So that will too will help in this movement of improving the indicator. At present, there are 6 mobile apps which have been developed to facilitate people's life. Okay, and there are 2 they are being reviewed. Okay, to be launched soon. To reduce the digital divide and promote connected communities, a number of free Wi-Fi hotspots have been set up around the island in major public areas such as traffic centers, hospitals, municipalities, and district councils. At the ministry, we are overseeing the innovation portfolio. There has been for the first time the launching of the National Innovation Framework in October 2018, and it runs up to 2030. So it's a very good document. It lies the ecosystem of the innovation machinery. But now, like the rest of the world, we have been affected by the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. How do we maintain our innovation momentum in this era? So again, Professor Dr. Suku, has mentioned that we have not only to maintain but also to work towards improvement. Quite something to do. It is often said that such a crisis are opportune times to encourage in disruptive innovation. What will be the rules of research and development and IP in this new era? We understand that a panel of experts will be discussing all these important topics during the workshop. We would like to thank Mr. Mark Seri Corey and Dr. Chacha Wunsch-Vincent from the World Intellectual Property Organization for their support in the workshop. It is certain that their intervention and participation, along with yours, will guide our panelists and participants in this important journey. The WIPO leads the development of a balanced and effective IP system that enables innovation. So, we are lucky to have such an important stakeholder in our midst today, and I would advise all stakeholders to take this opportunity to interact with our expert from WIPO. On this note, now, we declare the workshop open and look forward to the recommendation of this workshop so that we can carry the agenda forward. So I wish you all a fruitful deliberation.
And thank you very much for organizing this prominent event. Thanks a lot to the Executive Director of the Research Council to be there, the Director also and the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the IT Ministry. This is a very important follow-up to a mission that we organized together in 2016. Time flies, and many things have, of course, happened since, in particular in 2020. But one of the characteristic factors of success in the GII, but more importantly, in innovation performance is, strictly speaking, the consistent application of innovation policy determinations. And I'm very, very happy that we are here together yet again. Maybe the delay between 2016 and 2020 has been a little bit long, so I hope we can shorten it in the future. But it's very impressive that we're here together. Now, with this in mind, I will swap to the slides that we have prepared. Obviously, one could talk, for hours about the indicators that we use and also the policy recommendations that we have. Given that we're virtual here and given that we have a charged agenda, that is hardly possible, but I'll try to do a good job in giving a sensible overview of the particular situation in 2020, but then also the particular case of Mauritius. Of course, it's hard to talk about 2020 and jumping right into the situation of Mauritius without acknowledging the world around us. Europe has just started the second round of confinements and lockdowns. When you look at the economic projections that are coming forward from the OECD and IMF, it's a pretty gleam and a gloomy picture ahead of us in terms of GDP growth. Now we know that GDP is usually a good forecast element for R&D and innovation expenditures too. So when we see a falling GDP growth graph, like you probably see on the screen right now, we're quite anxious. So we are actually wondering to which extent firms, innovative firms in governments will in the next few months, and in fact, I guess years now, be able to counteract this external shock which hadn't been envisaged at all, right, and which came relatively surprisingly and also which now lasts to a significantly longer extent. Now, we have some good news on the horizon. So my colleague Vanessa, who's also online here and the team, we've been looking very busily at quarterly R&D expenditure reports of the top firms, venture capital, and so forth. And when you look at the top innovation players, it's safe to say that they will be relatively resilient to the economic crisis. So if you look at the top players such as Apple, but also in the automotive sector, these firms have a lot of cash they sit on to continue their R&D expenditures at previously high levels. Same is true with intellectual property filings. We don't see a huge slump that would be expected if you just look at the GDP growth figures. Now, that's the top spenders, those that already have everything they would like to have, and they already at the, they're already the stars of the innovation arena, including some of the countries that go with it, such as the US and China, Korea, etc. Question here really is, what happens for firms that had it just started, to ascend to the innovation arena, and that really rely dramatically on inward coming knowledge flows and outbound transactions to actually accelerate their learning and actually absorb knowledge from abroad to make it itself into this innovation arena. And what's a type of country other than an island, right, is more reliant to these cross-border knowledge flows, and in particular the countries such as Mauritius, which still today relies heavily on certain agricultural exports and textiles, but it also is has put all its money, pretty much all its money in terms of innovation in the area of ICT services, and also in certain respects fintech. So for a country such as Mauritius, they're very keen now to analyze what the next few months yield in terms of direct repercussions, for your innovative, learning and progression. Now, before this conference, we had already a few interesting calls with the chairman and executive director of the Mauritius Research and Innovation Council, and we actually wondered, it's probably not a bad time to be focused on ICT services, correct? If anything, the crisis has accelerated the digitization of many processes, and it has actually also intensified any sort of back office operations to be automatized. So it's certainly not a bad place to be in, but let's discuss, in the discussion time, if you see positive repercussions so far. The other point that the GII tackles this year is access to venture capital. Now, for most countries that we talk to, we have 190 member countries, and I'm thinking that only about 10 have a decent level of venture capital access, right? So 180 don't. And clearly the crisis will aggravate this situation. So we are, strictly speaking, quite pessimistic on how the access to VC will evolve in the future months. Clearly we see that for the top players, some uptick has already happened already. So in the second quarter of 2020, in the case of the US and a few Asian players, China in particular, the VC situation, venture capital situation is improving again. But I dare to say that for the vast majority of our member countries, including Mauritius, the situation will be more complicated down the line, and it was already complicated to begin with. So it's really, really important that we see how we can counteract that. Now let me move to Mauritius, and maybe just a few general points on the GII first. If you look at the broad trends of the GII over the last few years, one thing is that there's a number of countries, 2025, which always dominate the top slots. And most of these are OECD high-income type economies, with the main exception of China, the only exception of China. So clearly, innovation is a function of development, and development is a function of innovation, right? So there's always a clear association between the two. Now there is two major trends here. One is a clear progression of countries that come from Asia as a region. And in that respect, it's really worthwhile to mention China again, but also India, Philippines, and Vietnam. These are all countries that have in common that they don't contact us or work with us only every other 4, 5, 6 years. They have a consistent GII and innovation policy in place that they monitor on a sectoral and country-based level. And that helps them to progress over time. Now, you have some star performers outside of the Asian region. In fact, as Mark, who's still on the line, my director for Africa, mentioned, we have some of these rising stars in Africa. And this is very encouraging for us, because in some other regions, which I will not name now, but in particular I'm thinking Latin America, we are kind of thinking that we don't see the same progression of individual players. Now in Africa, we do see some overperformance relative to development. And in the case of Mauritius, we also see some very strong upward moves in the rankings. Overall, the Mauritius ranking in the context of Africa is one of the best, in conjunction with South Africa and then certain northern African countries. So clearly the Mauritius ranking is really out of line in a positive way relative to the other African rankings, but careful, as the Deputy Permanent Secretary mentioned, and also the Executive Director of the Mauritius Research Council, the jump that we have seen from Mauritius this year has been very unusual, okay? So it's very important, as you have recognized, to not directly infer this to a very well-functioning innovation ecosystem, a consistent application of innovation policies. I think that it's part of that, but another part is strictly related to certain data jumps that we haven't really seen before. Now, I don't want to discourage the audience, but it's also one of the first times that we really we put a little asterisk to the Mauritius jump, noting that that this is quite unusual, and that we actually think it's partly due to data issues too. So it's really going to be a big work for us together to address and identify what is linked to performance improvements and what is linked to just better data availability. Now, you all know the jump in rank, so I will actually jump over this. What's really interesting is that relative to development, the current Mauritius rank is exactly what one would expect, right? So the ranking that you had prior, in the 70s and 80s, was strictly underperforming relative to your GDP per capita. Okay? So now you perform about at the level of expectations. So it's a question, was the previous data wrong and now we're about right? And the seeds that had been planted with your former president also, that we met on, they had a real powerful vision on science and technology, were the seeds planted effective in addressing this unequal ranking, and then how do we move from there? That is the really important question. Interestingly, so the pillars where Mauritius performs well and those that it doesn't perform so well haven't fundamentally changed since 2016, with one exception that in particular in the area of business sophistication, we have seen a strong slide relative to prior rankings. In institutions, it's very impressive how you maintain and continue to maintain the strong performance, for instance, in the area of ease of doing business, ease of starting a business, ease of starting a new entrepreneurial venture. And some of the weaknesses that we identified back in 2016 are also still the same. So for instance, majoritarily, the problem is one of lacking R&D, firms which don't resort to research and development, which don't have an innovation priority. And of course, this translates also outside of ICT services into a less strong performance on knowledge and technology outputs of the old style. I will jump over a few of the details here, but essentially it just mirrors this issue of the need to ramp up R&D investments in the private sector, then to translate those R&D investments into real innovation outputs on the field of ICT goods or goods in general, but also in the fields relating to patents and intangible asset-heavy companies and firms. Let me conclude by saying a few words on the government strategy going forward. So first and foremost, this is a special year, and there is a real risk in many countries that I talk to, mostly of course middle-income and low-income economies, that their stellar plans for improved innovation expenditures will take a real hit by the COVID crisis. Right? It's easy for me to stand here and say, you should continue to boost R&D expenditures. It's very easy for me, right? Because I'm essentially just an international civil servant, right? So it's easy for me to give advice to ministers, etc. For ministers currently, it's a very delicate and difficult situation, right? So the health system usually is in shambles. Public deficits are high. There's real important and ugly issues on the front of unemployment and businesses that have to foreclose. So in that sort of context, sometimes innovation expenditures are forgotten, but our role, of course, is to play that card and to remind ministers and governments that at this particular juncture, it's not the time to forget about innovation expenditures in the first place. So it's quite critical, I think, to identify the priority sectors for you in the next 2 to 3 years, if they have changed due to the crisis or whether the crisis has accelerated a certain digitization trends that you should actually jump on. Now, generally speaking, I really hope that we can move Mauritius from the second group of countries to the third. I think that Mauritius is already in the second category of countries. So the savoir-faire and the awareness of the GII, the ability to use the GII, the interactions with us is already very high, and I really thank in particular the Mauritius Research and Innovation Council for driving this work in the recent years, but in particular also in the recent months. My plan for this meeting, if you agree, is to move Mauritius to the third basket, where actually the next time we talk is not in 4 years, in 2024, but hopefully in, let's say, 6 months, where actually we see that we have we align our understanding on the GII Mauritius performance. We identify certain weaknesses that have to be overcome and certain strengths. We put this on paper, with really 10 goals that are hopefully signed off by the 2 or 3 relevant ministers. Often it cannot be just the IT minister alone, it needs to be a cross-section of ministries involved. And then we have some clear specific targets, both on the front of IT, but beyond IT is very important too, and also, of course, an intellectual property policy that goes with it. So, bouncing back on the recommendations, and these are my last 2 slides, of 2016. In 2016, we had asked, does Mauritius now have a formal innovation and IP strategy in place? That question is still topical, and more work is needed relative to 2016. The issue of low R&D and innovative firms, despite of the stellar performance of some ICT firms, is still a bit of an issue, so we have to think outside of the box how to change this. Back then, I really, I visited a number of ICT services firms and the very able MITIA and the other IT associations, and I was quite impressed by their performance. But I also guarded the minister at the time on avoiding an over-focus on a simple niche ICT services sector only, right? So it's very important to continue your other efforts. You had mentioned ocean economy, biodiversity, and increasingly also I see some mentions of offshore finance. It's very critical that you don't fall in the IT trap only when you proceed, right? There's many resource-based or traditional sectors that I have visited or seen in Mauritius that are also very reliant in the near future on innovation. That you will be able to scale up your R&D and university component in your innovation system. You will manage the very strong education system that you have in place and manage to ensure that the strong primary, secondary education translates into very fit young Mauritian graduates who then can be researchers and also make their skills available to these new innovative firms. You need to build on intellectual capital and IP. The performance of Mauritius in trademarks is quite amazing. We have to analyze a little bit in more depth why this is the case. But in the area of patents and other forms of intellectual property, a little bit more work is needed, and this starts with a strong IP development plan, established, with my colleague Director Seri Kore, and also with an urgent appeal for you to consider the accession, of course, of the key, WIPO treaties. Back then in 2016, the PCT accession seemed imminent, but I think it hasn't happened quite yet, so this is an important priority factor. Here I'm talking not as a diplomat, but I'm talking as an economist that would advise you. And finally, and I'm coming back to my earlier point, let's really make sure that after this meeting, we note down 10 priority action areas and sectors that we have something really written, and that this is really adhered to by the minister or several ministers indeed, and that we can work together on this basis for the following months and hopefully years to solidify the ranking of Mauritius. And back in 2016, I say let's have a new Mauritius miracle. In my conclusion, I think it's still timely to say that the current situation offers new opportunities for Mauritius. And I really hope that we can accompany you, as you rise through the innovation ranks in the near future. Now, with this, I want to play the ball back to you, and thank you again, for your patience as I went through this, and also for involving us so heavily yet again in your plans.
Presentation of the MRIC, which is focused on data capture for the GII. So I'd just like to start by saying that data is very important, not only for the GII ranking, but us at the Council, we collect data because we want to develop evidence-based policies and strategies. It is only with data that we can get real information on what is happening on the ground. So I will just skip through some of the slides because we are running late. So just to set the scene, I will just explain to you what the GII is about. It's about 87 indicators which cut across many sectors including education, infrastructure, institution, innovation linkages, IP, creativity. I mean, it is just think of anything would fit in there. So it's really a lot of factors that we are looking at when we are looking at innovation. Now, if you look at the performance of Mauritius over the past years, what we see here, we were ranked 40 in 2014, then 82 in 2019, then suddenly in 1 year we rose by 30 places. And this is why Dr. Sasha mentioned it is an unusual trend. However, we'll try to give you some explanation for this unusual trend. So if we have a further look at the data for Mauritius in 2020, These are the 7 pillars which constitute the Global Innovation Index. And what we see here in 5 of the pillars, Mauritius has progressed drastically. For instance, if we look at institutions, which is one of the pillars, we were 62, now we are 22. And another drastic one would be creative outputs, where we jumped by 30 seats, and market sophistication, where we really progressed drastically. Now, what has been the cause behind this progress? In fact, I'm going to go back in time. When Mauritius was falling down the ranks at the council, we had a major consultation in 2018. That was we were quite worried, and we were wondering why this is happening. So we had a major consultation with public and private sector to find out the reasons behind our bad performance that time. So we did come across a few issues. Firstly, we identified challenges in the system. There were real issues while we were performing not so well. These issues were mainly about partnerships between academia and industry, not enough funding, private sector participation in R&D, legal barriers, and also skills mismatch. But we also came across some good things which were being done at that time, which could have contributed to our innovation ecosystem. Some of the good initiatives which were taken by government included new legislation in education, the Higher Education Act, the Business Facilitation Act, the National Innovation Program, the National Innovation Funds, the National Innovation Framework. All these initiatives contributed to different things which finally contributed to our innovation performance. But one major issue which we came across was lack of data. I think that came out very strong during the discussions. Maybe the figures which were going to WIPO were not reflective of what is really happening in Mauritius. And it was the wrong picture reaching the GII. This is where we started to probe a bit further, to understand what is happening at the level of data being provided to the GII. Now, one of the things which the report refers to is data revision. It has been reported in GII report 2020 that data revision partly contributed to our improvement in ranking. So when we were having problems with our ranking in 2018-19, the staff at the council had a close look at the figures. This is where we took note that there is one particular indicator which is called cost of redundancy. This is the number of salary weeks that the private sector needs to pay to a redundant worker. And the higher you have to pay, the worse it is for innovation. It's not so good. So when we were looking at the figures, we observed that there was a drastic fall in that ranking from 2017 to 2018. This is where we sensed that there was something wrong, and we found out that there was a mistake in the figures. We went through World Bank and with the support of EDB and Ministry of Labour and sent the corrected figure to World Bank and then to the GII team. And this is where we had a major correction in our figure. And we were ranked 23rd in that indicator this year. And this, we believe, partly contributed to our improvement in ranking. Now, the reason I'm saying this is not to say that we corrected the figure, but it's just to send a message that we need to be very careful when we are sending figures to international instances. These figures are being sent everywhere, and the image of the country is at stake. So this is where we started to sensitize ministries, parastatals, and even private sector on the importance of reporting the right information to international platforms. In fact, this figure comes from a survey from private sector. I don't know who filled the form, but obviously there was somebody who was not very careful and the error was persisting and giving the wrong picture for the country. Now, apart from the cost of redundancy, we also found out that there are other indicators where we did well. Venture capital deals was one of them, and also indicators which has to do with patents, trademarks, and industrial designs. We don't know why our ranking improved for these indicators, but we suspect that at the time that the data was being submitted to WIPO, we also had a letter written to all ministries to ask them to revise their figures. So maybe IP office did take that recommendation on board and did the necessary to correct our figures. Now, in the meanwhile, the Mauritius Research and Innovation Council has also been nominated as the focal point to give figures to UNESCO on R&D. And these figures are taken on board by the GII team to calculate our GII score. And since 2 years, we are providing figures for R&D expenditures and number of researchers. These figures do impact on 6 of the indicators in the GII. They are listed here. And again, I would like to highlight that we, as the Council, we are having difficulties to provide the figures because either the ministries find it too tedious to fill in the forms, or private sector doesn't have time to fill those forms. Here I would like to make an appeal to all of you here who are present to fill in the forms and give us the data, because if you don't give us the data, we won't have the right information. This will reflect very badly on the country, but also it will not allow us to develop the right strategies to improve our innovation ecosystem. So it is extremely important to see how we can improve on supplying the right figures. Now, we saw that we did well on some indicators in 2020, but we also took note that there are many indicators where Mauritius didn't have any figures. They are all listed here. Some of these figures, maybe things are happening in the country, we are not capturing the data, and the information is not going to WIPO, and we are not, it's at our disadvantage. But for some figures, like PISA scale and PCT patents, it is because the country is not having the right policies and is not implementing actions which will allow us to get those figures. These are more policy decisions which will be taken up by the panel later. Now, just to let you know how the GIS score is computed, this is very important to know. In fact, when we collect figures in Mauritius, we don't send them to the GII team directly. We are not allowed to do that. We have to go through the process. We have to go through what we call international focal points. And they are all listed on the slide here. There are many of them. They cut across education, ICT, financial indicators which go to World Bank. So the Council had to do a very tedious work to go and identify those international instances which were reporting figures for Mauritius. And we also found out that the data capture is done in different ways. Either these international organizations survey ministries directly, or they survey the private sector, or they go on the websites of different ministries and parastatals to capture information. And the thing is that sometimes we are not even aware that probably the World Bank or UNESCO is consulting our website and providing figures to Cornell University. The other step that we took after we took cognizance of the international focal points, we had to map who are the local sources of data, who is it in Mauritius, who is supplying data to these international sources. We managed to identify some of them. Some of these institutions will be here during the panel discussions to explain the figures to us later on. But so far, we've been able to identify sources of data for only 44 out of 80 indicators. We are still probing for the other 40. We don't know how it's done, but we are working with WIPO and we are working with other international organizations to capture those national sources so that we can work with them. Now, as you could see, this problem with figures and data is very complex. And this is why Ministry, through Cabinet, had a decision this year. In fact, all ministries now have to submit data in a timely manner when they are requested at international level. And also they need to make sure that the data which is being provided is valid data and real data so that the real picture goes abroad. Now, I don't think I will have time to go in depth in the figures. I intended to do that, but we are running short on time. I will just flash some figures here, which probably can give food for thought to our panelists a bit later. For instance, if we look at the figures for the past 5 years, we noticed a big jump in number of patents and trademarks and industrial designs in Mauritius over the past 1 year. I don't know whether there has been a sudden increase in creativity of our people, which I don't think so, or maybe it was an adjustment done with the figures by IP office. We don't know. I hope that IP office will clarify that during the panel discussions. Now, the other figure which I thought was interesting and which could provide food for thought is our figures on publications. In fact, the number of publications from Mauritius is cited as a weakness in the GII report. So we did have a look at the number of publications which is coming from Mauritius. We did find that there is an increase in the number of publications, but we also found out that most of the publications come from the University of Mauritius. I know that the VC will be questioned on that later on, but it is also true that it is the responsibility of other research organizations and other universities to contribute to publications as well. So that was our number one observation. Number two observation, which I thought would be interesting for this forum. Everywhere we have been reading that Mauritius is striving to become an ocean economy. We want to become an ocean economy to exploit our ocean resources. But what is happening at the level of publications? Out of 500 publications, only 5 publications are from the ocean sector. We feel that there could be a problem there. On one hand, we want to build on a sector. On the other hand, what we see here, there is not enough research being done in that field. Maybe this is the kind of thought that our policymakers they should see how to handle this, what should be done, what can be done. If we want to develop a sector, the R&D which goes with it has to be developed as well. So on this note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to